healthcare policy. We're glad that you could join us today. We have our keynote speaker, Senator Lindsey Graham, here just for a few moments, so I want to get right to him. Senator Graham was first elected to the United States Senate from his native South Carolina in 2002. Prior to that, he served 4 terms in Congress, representing the 3rd District of South Carolina. I think most importantly, he is a 33-year veteran of the Air Force and the Air Force Reserve, where he retired at the rank of colonel. He is a member of the Appropriations, Armed Services, Budget, and Judiciary Committee, and as I think you are probably all aware, he has become a leading voice in the debate surrounding the Affordable Care Act and the future of the American healthcare system. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Senator Graham.
Thank you. Good morning. Where's Blanche? There you are. Hey, my colleague, Blanche Lincoln. How you doing? Life must be good. You look great. Yeah, I'm sure you miss all this. I'm sure you miss all the fun we have. Anybody tweet? Stop. So, Doug, thanks for having me. I appreciate all your thinking in your think tank and sharing it. So, Medicare Part D. Voted against it, but it's worked out better than I thought. The concept of how you buy drugs and competition has brought this program in below what we thought it would be. I'm sure every time somebody gets medicated in the right way, they can stay out of the hospital, which is a good thing. Now you got an opioid problem, and that's not due to Medicare Part D, that's just due to what we prescribe. So what have you learned from Medicare Part D? The more choice, the better. The more private sector forces involved in a government program, the more likely it is to hit its budget target and actually be more sustainable over time. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to take that concept and apply it to the latest federal government healthcare program called Obamacare. It's reinforcing all the bad things. Medicare actually embraced ideas that Medicare Advantage, the Part D program, all have concepts where people can shop around for better prices, use the buying power, and you get better results for the budget and the consumer. Obamacare has taken us in a different direction. We're down to 1 insurance company in South Carolina. We started with 5. We had a 31% increase. 45% of the counties in the nation have 1 provider. What is it about Obamacare that's driving people out of the market? What is it about Medicare Part D that's keeping the costs contained? I would argue that all the forces in Medicare Part D are missing in Obamacare. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a different approach using the same amount of money. I want you to understand where we're going from Graham Castle. We leave all the taxes in place under Obamacare on the wealthy. We eliminate the medical device tax because it does hurt innovation at the time we need it. We take all the money that would have been refundable tax credits, that would have been direct payments to insurance companies, Medicaid funds in terms of Medicaid expansion, and turn it into a block grant. The revenue source is $1.2 trillion. So we take that $1.2 trillion that would have been spent on individual refundable tax credits, subsidies, insurance companies, Medicaid expansion dollars, and dish payments, and we block grant it. Under Obamacare, 4 states get 35.4% of the money. They represent 22% of the population. Can anybody name them? New York, California, Maryland, and Massachusetts. Nobody gets Maryland. How can that be? High-income states with high Medicaid utilization rates. So the goal of the block grant is to get the money back to the states, taking Medicaid expansion states who are up here, non-Medicaid expansion states, bring them up with this $1.2 trillion, give as much flexibility as possible to governors. You still have to cover pre-existing conditions with affordable, credible coverage under the CHIPS program. This is the block grant, goes to CHIPS. That's another federal government program that Bill Clinton designed to help children who are just above Medicaid eligibility, and it's a block grant to the states, and it's worked really well. So we take that money, we block grant it, and by 2028, 2030, we try to achieve parity in funding. that by 2028, 2030, every patient in every state gets about $4,300, $4,400 from the federal government. Then we'll do an inflation rate based on regions to get to parity, so that 4 states don't get 35% of the money and representing 22% of the population. The goal of the block grant is it's non-matching. Unlike traditional Medicaid, you don't have to put up a state match. The belief is if you took the same amount of money, this worked really well in welfare reform, by the way, in the 90s, and block granted it back to states with guardrails. You can't do roads and bridges, that you're going to get better outcomes because governors will have to be innovative, because there'll be a cap on the program over time, an inflation cap. It becomes a per capita cap program rather than unlimited. And those governors, whoever he or she may be, with a new pot of money, turning to people that exist in this room, and Doug and others, can deliver more innovative and flexible services to their populations than Obamacare can. And the crux of it is that under this system, the block grant, if you don't like what you're receiving, you can complain to somebody that you vote for. Trust me, I'm in this business. If you're complaining about a service that I have some responsibility for, and the complaint makes sense, then I'm going to do everything I can to make that service better. And I do believe under Obamacare, innovation is not required. It's a system that can't get better, and it's based on the idea of a printing press. The second aspect of Grant Cassidy is Medicaid. Traditional Medicaid before Medicaid expansion will stay in place in terms of the same state, federal matches, but we're going to turn it into a block grant over time. You have to spend the money on the target population under the guidelines set up by Medicaid, with more flexibility, not less. And in year 8 of the block grant, we're going to put a medical inflation plus 1% cap. By 2027, that saves $1 trillion to the federal government. Doug knows better than anybody what drives the debt is entitlement spending. So if we can pull this off, it will be the first time in modern history that we took an entitlement program, put a per patient cap on it, gave more flexibility to reward innovation, and put spending limits so that people would have to deliver. And if you can beat the inflation rate, you can keep the money in your state and provide other services in the medical field. One size does not fit all. Medicaid is a fee-for-service model mostly that's very inefficient when it comes to delivery. It's growing faster than medical services in the private sector by a factor of a lot. And my belief is if you put it in the hands of governors with guardrails, put a cap on it in year 8, not only do you keep us from becoming Greece by finally dealing with medical costs at the federal level, you'll get a better product for the consumer, because instead of running to the emergency room, I think a lot of Medicaid patients will have medical homes at the state level. So these are two very bold, long overdue ideas based in many ways on the concept of Medicare Part D. The more choices you have, the closer the delivery of the service to where the patient lives, the more transparency and the more accountability in the political system, the better off you are. I would end with this thought. How many of you know who your governor is in the state in which you live? How many of you know your state senator? State house member. Drops off a little bit, right? How many of you know the person running Obamacare in your state? All right, 2 people. That's good. It's the most I've ever gotten in any audience. And I'm sure they're good people. They will not respond like elected officials will. And if you put a cap on spending over time, the elected officials are going to have to deliver better quality. And if you have somebody who's screwing up health care, that becomes a campaign issue in every election, which I think will result in better services. How many people in the healthcare industry here? Your ship comes in the day that the government comes up with a program that has to be flexible and innovative, because they will look to you to help lower their cost and improve outcomes for their constituents. This is the best thing that could happen to people who believe in innovation and flexibility. This is the worst nightmare for those who believe in a single-payer healthcare plan, single-payer healthcare with a printing press backing it up. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Senator Graham. I am now going to introduce our moderator for today's panel, Paige Cunningham. She will then introduce the panel. So Paige is a reporter for the Washington Post, where she writes on healthcare and politics. She is also the editor of the daily Health 202 morning newsletter, which if you don't get, shame on you. So rectify that this afternoon and sign up for that. She previously covered healthcare for the Washington Examiner and Politico, where she wrote Politico Pulse. And most importantly, I think she started her career covering county government for the Naperville Sun, which is my father's hometown newspaper. So thank you, Paige, and I will let you get started.
I'll point out we have a morning email, Chris, which you should sign up for.
Here we go. Okay. Thank you, Chris. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You know, the last 6 months, I've been covering this law that shall remain unnamed that no one seems to be able to agree on. So it's sort of refreshing to talk about a program that seems to be performing well and most people agree has succeeded on most accounts. Plus, I learned a lot about Medicare Part D in preparing for this conversation, and I think I'll be ready to talk to my grandparents about it over the holidays. So, you know, good point of reference for them. All right, so first off, I'd just like to introduce our panelists here. We'll start with, to my left, Holtz-Eakin, founded American Action Forum in 2009. He served in a variety of policy positions, including as chief economist for the President's Council of Economic Advisors, director of economic policy for McCain's 2008 presidential campaign, and as we all know, director of CBO. I personally know Doug as the fastest talker in Washington. I think many years of trying to interview him and take notes, keep up with him, has prepared me for this very moment. Next to him, we have Senator Lincoln, who spent 16 years in Congress representing Arkansas, first in the House and then the Senate, where she became the youngest woman ever elected at age 38, which is a little depressing for those of us getting close to that age. Over her congressional career, she became known as a leader in the areas of agriculture, international trade, energy, and of course, healthcare. She now provides legislative and regulatory counseling as founder of Gender Policy Group. And next to the senator, we have Michael Anderson, who serves as Chief Pharmacy Officer for United Healthcare Medicare and Retirement, where he leads development of formulary and clinical program strategy for the company's Medicare plans. He helped lead United's Part D launch in 2006. And then last but not least, we have Michael Mason, who's been with Eli Lilly for more than 27 years, where he served in various roles, including heading the Lilly Neuroscience Business Unit and serving as president of Lilly Canada. He has led U.S. Lilly Diabetes since 2013. As a type 1 diabetic, I'm hoping to rate his samples bag after this panel for some free insulin. Is that okay? All right, so with that, let's get started. Just to kind of lay the groundwork a little bit, you all have some great handouts with some data about the Part D program. It's been 14 years since Congress created the program to fill a huge existing need to improve seniors' access to prescription drugs. A few data points. Since then, it's exceeded expectations by almost every metric. The program came in about 35% under projected costs in its first decade. About 9 in 10 seniors say they're satisfied with their coverage through the program. The share of Medicare beneficiaries with drug coverage has climbed from 75% to 90%. And in July, CMS announced that the program's base premiums will actually drop next year by about 3.5% to $35. So to kind of put this in real terms, the year before Part D was implemented, Seniors paid an average of $73 per month to fill an average of 1.7 medications. The year after it was implemented, that had fallen to only $42 per month for 3.5 prescriptions. Senator Lincoln, you were one of the 11 Senate Democrats who voted to pass Part D. So let's start with you. Can you describe for us the concerns about prescription drugs around that time, and then how Congress kind of came up with this innovative way for the government to partner with the private sector?
First of all, I'm delighted to be here, and I know Lindsay took a show of hands. How many of you all are staff? Senate House staff? Okay, great. I was a staffer before I became a member, and it made me a much better member. Of course, I came at it out of total naivety, so I guess that was a problem too. But you know, when we got started on prescription drugs, it was a real issue for me, Part D. My husband and I claim to be the sandwich generation. Not only did I come to the Senate with twin 2-year-olds, but his mother was terminally ill, my father was terminally ill, and his grandmother was 112. So we weren't just we were the club sandwich generation. We weren't just sandwich generation. But seeing that and having had grandparents live with us when we were growing up, I did, we realized the importance I did of a prescription drug component to Medicare. And when people said, well, how could how could you get into this discussion? How could you vote for this as a Democrat? Well, as a Democrat, I could not see or envision the future of a Medicare program without a prescription drug component. When you could see the positive outcomes from seniors, particularly from my own personal standpoint, the difference it made in their lives, their increased productivity, and oftentimes certainly their quality of life. And so as we saw so much of that innovation going on, how could we not come together and make that happen? But I will say that it was a whole different process back then. And it was something that got started early. It got started in a bipartisan way. Many of us were working hard to figure out where the consensus was, not because we were afraid of compromise, but consensus is where respect starts. And as members, we could respect each other's differences, but we could also respect each other's commonality. And so, you know, it was a challenge because there was always those forces back then that were trying to pull us apart as Democrats and Republicans, but there were 9 Republicans that voted against it, 11 Democrats that voted for it, and I think that should tell you something, that quite frankly, what we do here is not expect perfection, but look for where we have to start to make a program. And I will rattle till you cut me off. So, but this was a great experience because, again, I adored my staff, and I still adore them. And I adored all the staff that I worked with. But one of the things we realized once we passed this legislation was that we could not sit back and just wait for it to happen. We took a dog and pony show on the road. We reached out to the administration. We had officials from regional offices of CMS come to Arkansas. We partnered with others, the area agencies on aging. We partnered with the AARP. We partnered by deputizing people in Sunday school classes and Rotary clubs to be able to help the seniors figure out what it was they were signing up for. The drug card, because the benefit wasn't supposed to start. They don't understand those things. They don't understand the things that you see in a day-to-day workplace on Capitol Hill about how things are delivered and folded out. And we had to do the drug discount card, which was a nightmare. They didn't understand it. It was crazy. 800 numbers were tough. So we had to go out into the field as members and staff and others. And I don't know, but that didn't come as a surprise to me, that I hadn't finished my job just because I voted for something.
Senator, if I can, well,
I don't know,
yeah, no,
go back to your question, but anyway.
that's really interesting. Well, on that note of kind of understanding the program better, Doug, can you talk a little bit about what you see as the strong points of the program, and as someone who is a free market advocate, can you explain that a little bit for our audience? I mean, I think most of us weren't around when the program was passed, so just so we all have kind of a basic understanding.
So there were a number of concerns about the program at the time of its passage. I think one point that's worth emphasizing about what Senator Lincoln said is that, it was 2003. It was time to have coverage of the cost of outpatient prescription drugs because they're part of modern medicine. And if you're going to have a program that covers the cost of medicine, it should include the drugs. So that, that was just the sort of common sense step from a health care point of view. Then there were the issues of the cost. And, as is widely touted, this program came in well below the projected budget cost. For 2016, it'll be $100 billion below projection made by some group named CBO, led by some guy who really obviously was not high in projection. That was me. So, and that is really a testament to the genuine power of private sector competition. A lot of that, and this is not that we didn't anticipate some development of generics or some of the brand name drugs coming off patent and becoming cheaper, but the pace at which it happened and the ability to get people into cheaper drugs is just phenomenal. And the tiered formulators worked really well. I think there's a lot to be learned from that. The single biggest testament to the power of using market forces in this is the thing that didn't happen. In 2003, during the debate, there was concern that the private sector just wouldn't show up everywhere across the United States. The program is divided into regions, and there was concern that in some regions there would be no prescription drug plans to offer plans to seniors, and what would happen then? So there's an enormous fraction of the Medicare Modernization Act that is devoted to fallback plans. And they would be government-run public options for prescription drugs, essentially. And there was the design of the fallback plans, and you would run the fallback plans, and when you kick into the fallback plans, and we have never seen a fallback plan. The average senior has nearly 20 choices in their area. The plans have entered, competed, and delivered prescription drugs tremendously successfully, and I think that's really one of the most important pieces of design. My biggest concern about the program, so just full disclosure, I was at the White House when we first started talking about what was then known as Helping Hand. Went over to the CBO as the bill got passed. I'm incredibly proud of the best performing entitlement program. I like it more than my children, it's true. And I've always been concerned about people not understanding the importance of the design and the power of the innovation that comes with the private sector. Many people just think of it as another big entitlement spending program. We spent $400 billion and we didn't pay for it, and that was true. And that was a concern. But it's really the program design that makes the most important.
Well, on that issue of competition, that's something, there's been a lot of discussion around the affordable care marketplaces and insurers dropping out in some areas, but it's pretty staggering the success that Part D has had. I looked up some stats. It looks like so even in Alaska, where there's 19 plans, that's the smallest number of choices that any beneficiary would have in any area, all the way up to 26 plans in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And maybe one of the mics can address this next question. Perhaps Mike Anderson, why did United want to get into the Part D space, and kind of can you give us the insurer's viewpoint?
Yeah, well, grateful to be here today with you. We had a long-standing relationship with AARP, and we had offered with AARP pharmacy discount cards. And those programs certainly helped meet some of the need around affordability of prescription drugs, but we knew that there were a lot of people who were unnecessarily struggling still to afford their medications. So to echo what's been said, pharmaceuticals are so central to modern medicine and ultimately keeping the overall medical benefit of Medicare affordable, that it just made good sense. And United was very, very supportive of it early on. I would say that we've learned a lot along the way with the program as well. We certainly have some ideas around how we think the program could be even better. But overall,
We'll get to that at the end.
I think we've done a lot of good through the program, and the way that I tend to think about it too with Medicare beneficiaries, they're kind of voting every year with open enrollment to have a chance to stay with our plan or leave our plan. And I tell the pharmacists on my team, we're developing our formularies and working with our actuarial teams to price the benefit, that if we're doing good work, we'll be rewarded by people choosing us year over year, and we're fortunate that many Medicare beneficiaries do choose to stay with us year over year.
Another thing that has been discussed a lot with the ACA is the individual mandate and convincing people to sign up, and how do you incentivize that? Can one of you address how that's done through Part D?
You want to take it? Well, I mean, there are a bunch of different perspectives on it. My brief one is that for those who were not around at the time, basically the president had said, look, here's $400 billion over 10 years in my budget to create this program. So there was this finite amount of money that had to be devoted to the original Part D program. And then the question becomes, how do you get people in, and how do you get balanced risk pools? It's the same discussion for the ACA. I mean, there were lots of seniors who have very deep pharmaceutical needs, and some who don't have many, and so you want to get everyone in. So the way that worked out was there was front-end coverage for everybody. And so if you signed up, you got something right away. Then there's this thing that was called the donut hole, somewhat disparaging by some, which was the fact that for a long period in your drug costs, you didn't get much help out of the insurance program. And then there was the catastrophic back end, where if you spent a ton on drugs, Part D was going to pick up most of it. And the front end was the incentive to get people in, and especially to get in the relatively healthy people. So it produced both pretty high participation and relatively well-balanced risk pools from the beginning. And since then, there's been efforts to fill in the donut hole, but there was only $400 billion. So if we didn't front-load some of it, they probably wouldn't have gotten the participation in the risk pool next that they got.
I'd add just one thing quickly too. There is also a late enrollment penalty in Part D, which I think has been effective. I think most people appreciate that there will be a penalty if they choose not to enroll when they're eligible.
Well, and seniors
To say though, to all of those points, you have to educate your constituency that there is a penalty, because otherwise they're going to be mad on the wet hen when they go and find out what happens to them. So I think that educating and back then we were working in tandem with each other to try to educate people about what we were trying to do. I don't think it's really fair to compare it just to the Affordable Care Act, because when you start talking about some of the private marketplace involvement in the Affordable Care Act, if you look at places where you did have that states did take Medicaid expansion and they chose to put it into their exchanges, then you have had some participation and you've had some coverage. I know that was something I encouraged our governor to do, was to, you've got insurance companies that are already, facilitating federal programs. There's no reason why you can't do that through the exchange and increase your volume, which in turn balances out some of your risk and really encourages more people to get engaged with it. So I think that's really important. The Affordable Care Act also would have eliminated the donut hole eventually. I mean, those are all things that are important, and I think the $400 billion really was in the instructions, wasn't it? It was a part of the instructions, and so that was an important thing too for people to realize that we had to work to keep something below, or that point of order would kick in and something would happen. So I think that there's a lot of things that if you really look into do something that's going to be meaningful for the people that you serve, as you do in terms of the same constituencies that I serve, then there's a way to work out and find some of those places where you can make that happen, but you still have to revisit it. Mm-hmm. Things change.
Well, and a big part of convincing seniors to sign up too is just offering them a benefit package that they're happy with and they feel like they need. So maybe one of the ways you kind of address this is what kind of flexibility is there in Part D plans in terms of the medications that they cover and in terms of the array of choices that seniors have.
So there is quite a bit of ability to innovate with plan design and formulary within the Part D plan. There are many CMS requirements which form the basic structure of the coverage which we have to work around. So there are requirements around, for example, every major drug class has to have 2 covered options if there are more than one available. So there are some basic parameters that we work within, but then we are free to really customize our formularies within those parameters as long as CMS will ultimately approve it. CMS has to approve any formulary that we market, so it's a filing process that we go through. You see a fair amount of variation across Part D plans and the formularies. They all have kind of a basic structure to them, but some of our standalone PDP plans have very low premiums. And that's where a lot of the growth is occurring in Medicare Part D, the standalone plans. The baby boomers who are aging in are looking for low premium plans. To get to those level of premiums, we have to have very narrow formularies. It's the only way that you can get to a plan that prices that way. We have other plans that are very rich, and the plan that we launched Part D with, AARP Medicare X Preferred, that plan has a very broad formulary. And there are people in that plan who are very loyal to it, they're willing to pay a higher premium. I think the beauty of it is we're able to offer enough variation that people who are shopping primarily on the basis of premium have options, people who are really looking for broad coverage have options, and fortunately that level of flexibility will continue.
First of all, it's great to be here. Second of all, Senator Lincoln, my mom and dad were born in the 30s, and so right when Part D came in is right when they needed it, and I know that without Part D, they probably would have not lived as long as they did. So thank you for voting on it. Thanks for bringing this up.
And that's such a great point, because although it did cost a lot, and we were worried about the cost because we knew it wasn't paid for, I also knew that people living a healthier life, getting the prescription drugs that they needed, was going to be a cost saving, either from less hospitalization or greater productivity, a whole host of different things. So I know I've benefited from it.
Yeah, well, let alone they see their great-grandkids.
That's right.
So thank you. I think one thing you'll see is difference is not just the formulary design, but also the member experience. And that's where I think the Part D design is so smart, is because you have competition. And Mike with United, he might have plans out there, but if his competitors are incentivized to provide a better member experience, which causes Mike and United then to react to that. And who benefits are those seniors that not only have flexibility in design, but you start seeing more and more innovative member experiences, which can make things simpler, make things better, and lead to better experiences.
Can you give some specific examples of ways to improve?
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Mike, because that's really a good point. And as we look at our competitive position in the Part D program, the service experience is really the primary way we're choosing to differentiate ourselves from competitors. We have completely redone how we do our call centers in Medicare. We've given, we call them advocates. They're advocates on behalf of these beneficiaries. And we give them, as call center agents, advocates, licensed to be on the phone as long as they need to be on the phone. There's no average handle time requirements or any of this sort of stuff that's typical of call centers. We recognize that some of these issues that people are dealing with are extremely complicated, and that has proven to be very well received by members. We have members write letters to these advocates thanking them for some of the help that they've been able to give them, and sometimes these calls last over an hour or 90 minutes to get through an issue, and we're very proud of that sort of service that we've established. And then there's been some innovation as well, which I can talk about either now or later, but we recognize that a pain point with any pharmacy benefit, and true of Part D as well, is when people encounter limitations in the coverage due to the formulary or the cost of the copay, it's always a bad experience when people learn that information at the pharmacy counter. To the extent that we can avoid people showing up at a pharmacy to learn their drug has a prior authorization requirement, or it's not on the plan's formulary, or it's way more expensive than they would have imagined. That's huge around creating a better member experience. It also creates a better prescriber experience. So what we're doing is we've made some really pretty massive investments in electronic prescribing technology that we are beginning to deploy. United Healthcare is beginning to deploy with our Medicare plans. And this technology will message the prescriber directly within their workflow. So physicians use their electronic medical records primarily as their electronic prescribing tool. The technology that we built integrates into the EMR so that as the physician is choosing a drug, if it's a choice that's relatively low cost, is a good clinical option, there won't be any messaging. They'll just continue prescribing as they normally would. If, however, based on the patient's formulary or clinical concerns, there might be another option the prescriber should consider, the tool will message them and say, have you thought about these options? And what it also does is it actually runs a trial claim against our claim system. So it'll show the prescriber what the member will pay if they left the physician's office and went to the pharmacy right now. So it's real-time information showing complete transparency around what the out-of-pocket experience is going to be for that patient. And the early feedback on that tool has been incredibly positive from prescribers. And I believe that's also helping improve the member experience.
Let's drill down into the issue of cost a little bit more. So tomorrow, Bernie Sanders and a few other Democrats are going to introduce new legislation to direct the HHS Secretary to negotiate lower prices for prescription drugs. Of course, the President has talked about this issue quite a lot. And any of you can respond to this, but how does Part D restrain drug prices without resorting to price controls?
Why don't I start there? I think the easiest thing to say, I think competition is critically important in this. So just as Mike has to compete in the design he plans and member experience as well as the premiums, that then forces United and their competitors to come to us and say, okay, we need to have lower premiums, so we need a better price on that. And I think the best way to look at it is that does Part D receive good rebates back compared to other plans is to take a look at the average rebate in Part D compared to commercial insurance. And Part D rates on average are 10% higher. Plus, pharmaceutical companies also provide 50% of the coverage gap. So that usually adds another 5 to 15% on top of the commercial insurance rates. So I think that's a good sense that competition is working. It is driving prices down. I think if you think about the economics, if you didn't have the Part D system designed where it is right now, and the fact that really premiums have stayed steady for years, without Part D, the pharmaceutical industry really wouldn't be incentivized to go in and do research on drugs that are very much focused on seniors because you wouldn't have a return there. And I think that would take us into a situation where essentially the incentive are for people to focus on only those diseases that affect those with employer-based commercial insurance, which I don't think is the right thing for society. So I think right now you have to have the right balance between competitions, low prices, but enough incentives to drive innovation. And what you see with Part D is that there is more clinical trials, more products that are focused on senior and elderly care than there was before Part D. So I think that's the perfect balance between competition, prices, as well as putting some incentive out there to drive pharmaceutical innovation.
A term that you hear a lot in talking about Part D is these PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers. Can someone give a quick explanation of those and how they work and play into all of this?
So a PBM or a pharmacy benefit manager is a company that I, as a health plan, contract with to basically administer a number of functions for us. So they're the ones who administer the claim adjudication system. They're processing all our claims on our behalf. There are different structures across different health plans around how much a health plan chooses to delegate to their PBM. Some health plans keep more accountability directly within the plan. Some delegate very extensively. In the case of United Healthcare, I think we're pretty common where the PBM contracts our pharmacy network. So they're doing the negotiations with all the network pharmacies on rates. They contract our rebate contracts with pharma. They, as I said, they're paying the actual claims and doing those sort of functions. They're performing the coverage determination function on our behalf. So if somebody's trying to request a drug that's not typically covered on the formulary or a drug has a prior authorization, the pharmacists at the PBM are administering that activity as well. So there are a wide variety of functions that a PBM delivers on behalf of health plans.
And then they can also offer their own health plans themselves. You can then utilize the same services there.
And we really need more acronyms in healthcare policy
Yes,
as
we do.
well. Yes, yes. What role did generic?
I would say that they pretty much, don't they do most of it?
They do, and CMS has really high expectations, though, of Part D sponsors. Ultimately, accountability rests with us. So, which is the way it should be. Where if the PBM screws up and they're paying claims incorrectly, not charging the wrong copay, it's their problem that they cause, but it's ultimately my accountability in the eyes of CMS to make sure that doesn't happen. So we and every other health plan have tremendous oversight responsibility of our PBM. Wherever functions have been delegated to them, we have a lot of quality assurance process in place to ensure that the beneficiary is getting the benefit that they signed up for.
I just, for this population that we're talking about, are obviously seniors or perhaps disabled in terms of the Medicare coverage. That would be the only thing I would say is that when you delegate too much, when you've got too many people in charge of things, and you've got people who are normally either elderly and more sick, more impaired, or disabled, having too many people in charge, sometimes, I don't know, you can't respond as quickly. And I don't know if you have any of those circumstances? Or?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point that most Part D plans are big companies, and the last thing that we want is for a beneficiary to get caught up in our complexities. We need to manage that for them.
Mm-hmm. I just think it's important to remember that the constituencies we're dealing with, which are usually the people who do have specifics.
But before we go to takeaways, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the role of generic drugs in all of this. So in the paper you guys released today, it notes that 80% of drugs now provided through Part D are generics, and we've seen that upward incline over the last years. Can anybody talk about the role that has played in reducing costs?
Well, I'll just repeat what I said at the outset, which is we anticipated at CDL when we were sort of looking at the program for the first time, we anticipated generic entries, but we really underestimated, I think, the pace at which that would happen and the power of the combination of tiered formularies and a lot of competitors to drive the generic utilization and bringing cost per person lower than what we could have expected. It's probably one of the big surprises.
I would add on quickly that I think the generic drug pipeline and the richness of it has definitely helped with the affordability of the program overall. One thing I would leave the audience with, though, is what we're seeing more and more is not every generic drug is a good value, especially when generics first come into the market. There's often an exclusivity period where there's only one generic manufacturer for that drug, and those generics tend to be very high cost initially. So it's part of the complexity with generics, I think, is people tend to think that they're always the best deal, and in some cases they're not.
And I would just say from your description of your new program, that speaks volumes to being able to correct a lot of that, because the prescriber, I'm also married to a physician, as that subscriber sees what those options are and they know the specific condition of that patient, they can then choose something appropriate. So that's tremendous advancements in that kind of stuff.
And as the one up here that's probably impacted by generic drugs more than anyone else, I mean, I think it's a very healthy tension in the pharma industry because it puts a drive for innovation that's out there. You know that you have to reinvent the company with true innovation that payers value every decade. And it does put a very healthy tension there. And so I think we're all in on the generic drug trend because it will drive for further innovation. But I think we also have to realize that the innovation today becomes the generic products of the future. And so I think the healthiness of allowing us a patent life to make our, to be able to recoup our innovation, and then society gets the benefit from that at a low price for the decades and decades going forward. It is a good system that wants to be working.
Well, I want to move on to, oh, sorry.
So I guess the last thing I'd say, just for those there for the history, one of the things that jumps out about the Part D as it's evolved is it had a fairly rocky rollout. I mean, it's not like just flip the switch and everything went fine. It's fairly rocky. Is that a good euphemism?
I can attest to that.
No kidding, it was ugly.
Yeah.
And people were mad and they didn't understand it. And an enormous amount of attention has been paid by all players to the customer experience, both in the sense of getting the prescribers better tools, having counseling for people. Even the most able seniors, my mother, their solution to trying to figure out what to do is to call me and say, which plan do I buy? You did this thing. And I don't know. So that on that front, the customer experience is really different than almost every other experience I've seen in sort of programs that have been set up. And then the program has generated enormous innovation in terms of new pharmaceuticals targeted at that population. So all the concerns about, competition not working in the long-term interests of seniors, I think have been completely misplaced. The record is quite good on that front.
I want to move to a few questions about application and sort of takeaways, but we'll take some Q&As for the last 10 minutes, so be thinking of any questions you might have. So we've talked about a lot of innovations here. Could you apply any of these innovations to other entitlement programs, perhaps the individual marketplaces, Medicaid?
Well, I would just say, just on the last words of Doug, that you do have a target population. So recognizing when you are starting something different, like the Affordable Care Act, I mean, it is not a targeted population of over 65. I mean, you're dealing with young kids, older people, all kinds of folks. And I think that that's something that we did well here, in being able to target it. And one of the things is what you mentioned was, it was not pleasant at first. I mean, it was a real educational effort to really educate seniors, because they didn't like computers, they hated sitting on an 800 number, they didn't know much about what was going on, and it took a lot of, and they all called me personally. When my mother gave
You didn't have navigators back then?
But I mean, we really worked at that. And I would just also say that competition works when people participate, and when companies participate, and I think that that's really important. And I think both of the gentlemen at the table have worked hard at participating in, obviously, this program, and I think also the Affordable Care Act in terms of the exchanges that are out there. But I do think that those are important. They seem kind of just that they come natural, but they're not easy to do.
So obviously a very different population between the ACA marketplace customers and the Medicare. Any other big differences you see in terms of why we're kind of seeing the marketplaces struggle now versus the successes with Part D?
It was a program that was mandatory spending. I mean, it wasn't as dependent on the private marketplace as the Affordable Care Act. I mean, it's not a single payer system. It's using the marketplace and the combination of competition and volume to try to get as many people covered as possible. I mean, that's totally different. In my opinion.
Or Doug?
So I thought the question was, what other programs would benefit from Part D like treatment? And if you think about it, there's another program out there that has the characteristics of Part D, which is it's nationwide commodities. That's one of the things that really helps here is, the same drug exists in all the markets across the country. It's very easy to organize a federal program with a national commodity and a very targeted population. And I think we should turn the WIC program into a Part D program, because women and infants are a target population that has very special needs. They would benefit from a better customer experience. The supplies that go into providing that program are nationwide commodities, and we could generate another very high quality program on a targeted program compared to one that I don't think is doing all that well right now. So
There is. You're seen a decline in several areas. And I don't necessarily disagree. I think you have to do everything, not just, you also have to do the education for nursing, the possibility of nursing moms and other things like that, as opposed to just, whatever, but educating and on healthy foods too. There's some opportunities there.
And as we all know, with any big piece of legislation like this, fixes and tweaks and all sorts of things are needed after the fact. Have there been improvements made to Part D since 2003? Can you highlight those? And then after that, I want to hear from you folks as your ideas as to how it can be further improved for insurers and drug makers.
Oh, sure. I think, first of all, I think back to your previous question around, what other parts of the government our programs could benefit from a Part D-like program. I do think anything where you need innovation and anything where you need the member or the consumer experience to improve, that's what we do really well in the private industry. And so if you take a look at the different parts of the different programs and entitlements, when you need innovation, then these type of programs work really well. When you need to improve the member or the teacher or consumer experience, that's what we do really well. And that's what we get better today. And that's what we have to innovate and compete in or we don't survive. When we go on in the decades, we can't do that. And so I think that's the tension, the healthy tension that's in there. I think the improvements, on the pharma side, the things that we see as the opportunities that we hear, we spend a lot of time listening to people who use our medications on a daily basis. And there's a lot of focus on the donut hole and the cost that they have to pay during that donut hole. One of I think the quick fixes that could help is, you're seeing many much more following biologics or biosimilars coming out. But with the current legislation, those are exempt from the pharma paying 50% of the donut hole come 2020, 2021 timeframe. And so that disincentivizes them because if pharma's not paying that, the insurance company's got to pay that. So if you're an insurance company or if you're a PBM and I can use a branded product and pharma will pay half the donut hole, or I pay or have a biosimilar on formulary and I have to pick up that 50%, well, you know where the decision is going to go. That seems that you're not really driving competition in that place. So I think from what we hear and what we kind of see emerging, I think that's a quick fix that would help out, Americans across the board.
In terms of innovation that's already occurring within the program, I think we have a lot more tools that CMS has allowed now around opioid overuse. And there's still a lot of work to be done on that problem. But I feel like now we're finally in a position where we're starting to have some pretty meaningful tools that we can deploy and are allowed under the program rules. We're waiting for some more guidance. In 2019, Part D sponsors will have the ability to lock high utilizers of opioids into a single pharmacy. And that's a program that's been successful in Medicaid and other benefits. So I think that'll be a step in the right direction. Do you want me to go into what I'd like to see improved?
Maybe just a few quick points.
Just a really quick point. One thing that I think is maybe due for us to look at is, most drugs are covered under Medicare Part D as in dog, but there still are drugs that are covered under Part B as in boy and Part A under different circumstances. Those drugs can be covered like under Part A for people in hospice. In Part B, there's a bunch of legacy drug coverage that existed before Part D, Medicare Modernization Act was passed. That legacy coverage still exists. And what it causes is a lot of administrative burden to the system in determining, we have to determine which benefits should be billed before we pay the claim. So the beneficiary experience is they're going into the pharmacy trying to get the drug. We want to pay the claim, but first we have to determine which benefit should be billed to, and that might require what's the diagnosis, what's the doctor treating. In some cases, we need to know, is the patient living at home or are they in a nursing home? There's some criteria that we have to determine to know which benefit to bill. I would argue that that's just an administrative task that doesn't really add any value to health, to the members' beneficiaries' health. And I've not quantified it, but there's quite a bit of money spent on that by Part D plans, that coordination coverage.
And then in terms of, are there any fixes that Congress has made in subsequent years that have improved the program?
There haven't been big legislative fixes. This isn't something that underwent sort of, version 1, version 2. The same basic design has been quite durable. And I think that's a tribute to the notion that it's very easy to start up a PDP, a prescription drug plan, and there's a lot of benefit design flexibility within it. And so most of the improvements took place within the structure of the original act, and that's a sensible way to design it.
Okay, great. Well, we left some time for questions, so does anybody have a question? Anybody? Right here. Wait, we have a mic for you. Just one second.
Thank you. I'm Bonnie Duffy. I serve as the convener of the MapRx Coalition. We're a coalition that was started right at the passage of Part D, and we are over 50 beneficiary, patient, aging organizations. And at the time, our worries were much, Doug, like what you said, and Senator Lincoln, that the constituents who were part of our organizations weren't going to know how to sign up for the benefit. And we were also a little worried about, as CMS went to cross the T's and dot the I's, were they going to really have an eye on patient access? And I'll say that most of our members' organizations, which are national organizations, would totally agree with what you're saying here today, that now, next year we're going into 15 years since the passage of this program, and beneficiaries are very satisfied with it. And so it's a very timely panel, and I think I just wanted to touch on two things. One, an important thing that Congress did was close the donut hole. That was part of the ACA, and so I would say that's a very significant change to Part D. With the closing of the donut hole, beneficiaries are going to experience what is being referred to as an out-of-pocket cost cliff when that donut hole closes. So, Paige, I hope you'll do some reporting on that so that Congress will be aware of that cliff. The implication for beneficiaries will be almost a couple $1,000s more out of pocket if they reach that catastrophic coverage gap. So that's an important thing to look to the future. And then also, I would say on plan design, if all Part D beneficiaries had the United, your customer service inside their own Part D plan, I don't think I would even be making these comments today, but the appeals process is something that's very hard for beneficiaries. They don't get a notification at the pharmacy counter. So if you go and your drug isn't covered, you have to go back to your prescriber, to your physician's office, have them call the pharmacy, call the health plan. It's a very convoluted process, and CMS has made some progress on that, but I think that we could probably do more. I also think, also for competition to work, is the education that you all talked about, and for beneficiaries to understand. And we know from MedPAC data, probably about 13% of beneficiaries switch plans, so I don't know if that is, the economics people in the room, is that a good percentage or not. I would argue that with the changing of formularies, we might want to have people switching a little bit more, at least checking. If you go into Medicare.gov, you have to take 3 clicks through to get to where the formularies are. So I think that there's some more work that we could do with CMS to make sure that beneficiaries know. I think some other improvements that CMS has made in medication therapy management, and lots of changes that we would say around the edges have really helped beneficiaries.
Do any of you want to respond or offer further thoughts on
I would just ditto that making it user-friendly or more user-friendly is really critical because of the population that you're dealing with, there's no doubt. And I remember very distinctly myself and Max Caucus fighting very hard for the low-income subsidy, which I'm assuming is still at 200% of poverty. Is that 200%?
Provides really important coverage.
Right.
I'm glad you raised that because I've heard that some in Congress have proposed, MedPAC has suggested increasing that low-income subsidy co-pays, and it's something that our coalition has been very vocal about not increasing those co-payments for
If you
low-income
do that along
subsidy.
with losing the donut hole,
Yeah.
then you're going to have a lot of noise, I would think.
Any other questions? We have one back here.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to address what you were saying about those legacy coverages under Part B of certain drugs. And I don't dispute that there could always be administrative improvements. But one of those legacy coverages is immunosuppressive drugs for transplant patients. Isn't that the sort of thing where you would want, where there's some value in not having a deductible or a donut hole or a cliff, and perhaps it's appropriate to have that covered under a different schedule than all the normal drugs people take?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair commentary, and that's why I guess what I'm suggesting is it's just worth looking at and seeing, maybe some of those drugs should stay under Part B as in boy, but maybe there are others that should roll under Part D and get some administrative efficiency there. That's a fair point, though.
Any other questions?
What would the panel think about having an out-of-pocket catastrophic cap as part of Part D? A catastrophic cap, so that you don't continue to pay that high catastrophic level of percentage, which of a specialty tier can be a lot of money if we just cap it.
I think I was always open for most anything, depending. I think I'd have to dig more into it to figure out just how that works. But to be honest with you, that's what most people ask for and don't realize it is a catastrophic coverage. I don't know that they completely understand that, and I think that again, the responsibility of Congress and the agencies is to really try to determine whether people understand enough of what they're going to get. That sounds like as if we're not letting people speak enough, but I think it's just that they don't really get educated enough about what that might mean to them.
So this is related to something we haven't talked about, which is comparably important to getting people covered for their drugs is to make sure they take them. And the adherence issue, really, I think it's got some contracts that reward adherence that are discussed in Tara's paper. The thing to worry about is you get people in that range, they start not taking the drugs for the financial reasons because they're just way out in the catastrophic coverage. So off the top of my head, I can't figure out how many people are affected and all the numbers, but it's worth taking a look at.
I think if it gets outside of just Part D, talk about insurance in general, I think the people most vulnerable right now are those that have chronic diseases on chronic medication, and whether it's the high deductible plans or the donut hole, that is a real burden right now, and something that I think we need to figure out both on the commercial insurance side and then anything we can do to help in Part D. It is a big issue what we hear on a daily basis.
Any other questions? I guess one last question I have for you all is, so like we said earlier, many of us weren't around when Part D was passed. What do you think the takeaway should be for staffers? What do you think people don't realize about the Part D program?
I'm thrilled to have this event and in general to have people sort of take a look at just that one page, which is how does Part D work, because it's a program designed unlike any other entitlement, and it has worked phenomenally well.
And I would say ditto to that, and I would say that people have to realize that this is about as close to perfect as you come out with in terms of an original piece of legislation, because much of it you don't know. But again, dealing with a certain group of individuals, knowing knowing predominantly what they would need, and being able to create something, but then educating them about it is absolutely critical. But I mean, I found it to be a great example of how we could work in a bipartisan way when we started out working together to figure out how we solve this issue. So I think, if nothing else, to hopefully the staff in the room make sure that you're looking for the solution and not just a win for the day. It takes time and it takes energy and it takes good thought, but when we met, it takes respect. And working with other offices, Democrats or Republicans, you can come up with some really good ideas. And working with the private sector, really have some home runs. Plus, you learn as you go along, and you can work through that with the private sector in a lot of different ways. So I just encourage folks to look at it as a good example.
And I want to amend my remarks to just applaud Senator Lincoln in the following way, genuinely. At the time the program was developed and passed, there did not exist in nature a financial product known as insurance against the cost of outpatient prescription drugs for seniors. It wasn't anywhere. And the program invented out of whole cloth the notion that prescription drug plans would show up, they would offer insurance plans to seniors, they would negotiate with the manufacturers would in good faith negotiate with them, they would arrive at prices and premiums, the federal government would subsidize 75% of it, and we would entrust our seniors' health to this thing that did not exist. And they did it, and they voted for it, and it's worked really well. It was good program design, no question, but it was politically quite brave, because this was not a no-brainer. And for those who did it, I think they deserve the credit.
That's a good point. I don't have a lot to add beyond what's been said. I think I would just encourage you to study the program and think about what's worked with it and how we might replicate it elsewhere, I guess, and for other applications.
Only maybe on a different note, on the same, to answer the same question a little differently, is my mom, when she retired, there was 4 of us, 4 boys. Imagine trying to raise 4 boys. And then while she was working, and she had dreams that, after we got out of the house, after we retired, they'd get to travel a little bit. She'd be able to enjoy her hobbies. Well, my dad, who was 5 years older, ended up having Alzheimer's. And so her retirement was 24/7 caregiver of him. He passed away a couple of years ago. And what makes me proud about the Part D program is that I do work for a company that spent billions of dollars trying to come up with a cure or a treatment for Alzheimer's. Now, we haven't got there yet. We hope we can. But we wouldn't be able to invest in that without the Part D program. That gives us the incentives. And it's a program that, if you think about, it's cost efficient for the government and for the members. So it is probably the single program that allows us to drive innovation that Americans need in a cost-effective way. In fact, that premiums are flat over the last 5, 6, 7 years is just truly wonderful. So that's I think, down to the personal level, that's what I really appreciate about the Part D program.
All right, well, thanks to you all. Before we close, please indulge me. I'd like to invite you all to the Washington Post tomorrow morning at 9. We're doing a Health 202 live, and I'll be interviewing Senators Cassidy and Murphy. So just as a little side note, but thanks to you all, and this has been really interesting. Thank you.